Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sticking it out for the last part of today. I know it's a long day. I'm Brian Kralovich. I work for the eHome design team. I have a really cool job. I get to work with our extensibility partners and our design firms that we work with to work with those partners on some really cool applications. So I work on the shell as well as working on applications that you saw Joe Belfiore present today. So I get to work with folks like Schematic and Z-Tools who are here to help me present today, as well as working with some of our key partners like MTV and Comedy Central. I'm more like you. I've been in the industry for about 12 years, and I've been in Microsoft for 3 years. So I'm new to Microsoft, but not new to this type of work. So hopefully I provide a perspective that's more familiar with you. So today, joining me on stage is Richard Cardran from Z-Tools, and he's going to cover some design process and challenges and principles, and Kate Wajobe from Schematic. And both of those folks are working with a lot of our partners, and they're going to show some work today. So I'll just get going with this. So I'm just going to provide some context and quick overview for Media Center and designing for 10-foot. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is just remote control experience. This might be really obvious for a lot of you, but just we're used to working on the PCs with the mouse and keyboard, and typically we just call that 2-foot design. When you're working with Media Center and Xbox and different other game controllers, you're working with a remote control or a game controller, and we call that a 10-foot design. In the past, I've called that lean back or lean forward experiences, but now that we're getting into multiple devices and even further distance UI, it's really important just to know that there's a 2-foot and 10-foot experience here. And creating 10-foot experiences it presents new challenges for designers, because the UI, even though it's a richer experience, it's more compelling content, it's really a tighter UI, and you have to make things a lot simpler. So coming from the web, I've been working on websites for 12 years, and I know a lot of you in the audience who have done the same thing. It was all really about kind of stuffing the sausage and getting everything in there. Is my message right? And now it's all about simplicity. So people are expecting their experiences to be more full fidelity, more like television. This is a screenshot of our new remote control. And the reason I'm showing this is Joe showed our Xbox controller today. And in our new remote design here for Media Center, you'll notice this black area with those rocker buttons. And that's really where the key functionality and the interaction happens within Media Center and other 10-foot designs. So this is really the major component or the major sort of real estate on this piece of hardware where you can interact with most of your applications. So your choices are up, down, left, and right, and then hitting OK. You will use the back button a lot with this remote control. And then there's our green button, which is our logo, which kind of resets you and gets you home. And there are a lot of other buttons, and I've seen over and over and over again this comparison from this remote control and the front row remote control. And if you go back, there's our functionality right there. It's really simple. It's just as simple as front row in my mind, but it's more compelling because the experience is different. But here you have other functionality on top and bottom for controlling your video experience as well as shortcuts. So going back again, just focus on that black area there. That's where most of the interaction needs to happen. And when you compare that to a mouse and a keyboard UI, you have to think about the limitations there. So the second thing I'm just going to talk about real quickly is just general goals for Distance UI and how they apply to the work we've done in our own Media Center design work. Our goals are really just keep everything clean and simple. And I know right now everything's about the cult of simplicity. You hear it over and over again. But if you've been saying it for so many years, actually now's the time to really use it. So keeping things clean and simple, compelling, consistent, and direct. These are the sort of things we face every day when we're trying to design a 10-foot UI. Below that is a list of font sizes and readability and color. There's a lot of other issues we can contend with, and Richard and Kate will go over some of those issues later. Here I'm just showing our existing Media Center start menu. And if you notice here, it's really focused on this vertical navigation system. Very simple, a lot of space around the UI, and it mimics almost a DVD model in the sense that you can go up and down, and once you go into an area, it exposes more navigation for you. In our new release, and for Vista, we're exploring the horizontal in the navigation. So if you remember the navigation on the actual remote control, there's an up, down, left, and right. Well, in our navigation for Windows Media Center Vista, we're exploring the up and down and the left and right as well. And in a previous talk, Charlie Owen talked about how you can actually, some OEMs and partners can start to customize that left side of the start menu. So now I'm just going to go through some design principles and just show you some more visuals, and I'll try to get away from sort of the text since this is a design discussion. So let's get past this slide real quickly. But I just want to state that most conventional web design principles really fail from a distance UI. So things that you know about web design and all the things we've learned over the years, we have to rethink those sort of principles when you're thinking about 10-foot design. Design for Media Center is related to other distance design. So when we were thinking about designing Media Center, we looked outward. We looked at the places in the physical world as well as other types of interactive media. Again, I'm just throwing this in here, keep it clean and simple, and avoid density. If you worked on any portal sites, this is not the place for that type of work. And the things we've looked at internally on our design team are posters, billboards, DVDs, etc. So this slide here is just representing some distance UI beyond 10 foot, which is more 2,500, 200, and so on. So you can imagine different types of signage that might influence your thinking around distance UI, things we might take for granted every day. This is some really great signage for AMC, for a campaign that they're doing, and then taxi cab signage too. That could be 5 foot or 10 foot or 25 foot. And then something probably more familiar to some of you, Times Square. Here's some great distance UI. I realize that there's not a lot of interactivity in this distance signage, but there could be someday. So you have to sort of think about other types of distance UI. And then there's other types of distance UI that don't look very good up close at all, but in a distance, they make a lot of sense to us. So this is more of a design. I'm not really sure who's designing these things, but they're really interesting. And then DVDs as another example. This happens to be one of my favorites, Band of Brothers. But in a simple DVD model, you have two choices. And in this particular one, you know, there's two options for you here. There's live video playing in each one of these navigation options, and then you could choose one. Or in another scenario, there's more of a gallery view. So in this particular situation, it's kind of a journal, and I'm in there. I could thumb left, right, and choose 6 options. So in this UI, 6 is a lot better than 16. And then this idea of focus. Focus is probably the most important thing you need to pay attention to from a user standpoint. From a distance, it's something that users really need to kind of pay attention to. There can't be a lot of noise on the screen. I mean, people they're kicking back on the couch and they're leaning back and they have a few choices. They want to know what is the thing that's in focus at all times. It doesn't have to be a button or mimic any web standards, graphics, etc., but it should remain consistent everywhere. And it should be noticeable to the user. In this particular diagram, I'm just showing other types of focus states and ones that we've explored internally. This one is on the top left, opacity. We use that in our own UI, and then there's sort of this color border idea, which is kind of web-centric. And then on the bottom left is scale and shadow. You'll see a lot of that in our gallery views and our menu. And then this idea of 3D. This is just 4 ways out of 400, I'm sure, but these are the things that we were exploring in our design. And in this particular screenshot, you'll see that there's television overlay of our start menu. So we're using translucency on top of the video, so you keep the context for the user. And then you actually get your start menu, and what's in focus is popped up. So there's a three dimension, that third dimension, and a drop shadow. So there's a combination of the different kind of elements we're talking about. In our gallery view for the music library, again, the tile is popped up and in focus. And as I'm thumbing through these things, it's popping and my gallery is receding. So my gallery is probably at like 80% opacity, but my thumb is scaled up, it's a drop shadow, and it's in full focus. The same principles apply for text. Typography is really important to pay attention to in 10-foot UI. Again, scale, opacity, blur, color, they're all really important. Another good example of this is in our gallery view. If you move to a text, sort by artist, what we're doing here in Alone in Kyoto is just popping up the text, scaling it, and then just moving it to the left and changing the color. This seems really obvious, I realize that, but it's to make things as simple as this, it's a really hard task. And then to follow the rules throughout your UI experience is really difficult as well. Again, I just showed you this gallery view, but if I move up to my main menu or sub-menu, then you see how we recede the back, the gallery kind of sits back, so there's that third dimension, and we pop out the text. So we're sticking to our rules there with color and scale. And this is how it kind of all comes together, just a little quick animation. What's really important to note about all the things I'm talking about, they're static instances, but it's the in-between states of all these little principles that really make this experience compelling. So animation plays an important part of every decision you make in your UI. More than ever, motion and design and information architecture are really going to come together now in this new experience. I think that's going to be one of the biggest changes in your studios and in your firms, just trying to figure out where's our director guy, if there's such a thing, and where's our IA guy. And we should get those two guys in a room and talk about how we're going to make these experiences work. And Richard's going to talk a little bit more about that. So hopefully that gives you a little insight there. The third point I'd like to talk about is just readability, fonts, and text. You really need to avoid paragraphs and page text. When I'm sitting at home and I'm leaning back and I got my remote, the only thing I'm possibly able to do is just hit those 4 or 5 buttons anyway. The last thing I want to do is read a bunch of text that I have to sort of scroll through. That's what my 2-foot experience is for. So we really try to avoid that kind of density on the screen. Serif fonts for large title graphics and other graphic elements. This is sort of a principle we take from sort of motion graphic industry and titles. It's just sort of the vibration on the screen for sans serif fonts. Font sizes. 16-point is your new 9-point Verdana. So you have to get that in your head. This is the smallest font you could possibly use. You will use smaller fonts, and if you were to test it, you'll probably get some poor feedback because things start to move on screen at a smaller point size than 16. This presents real serious challenges for people trying to sort of get their message across. So you have to tell your story just a little bit differently than you have in the past. Instead of a lot of words on the screen, think about time and sequence and how to tell your story across several screens. And then just creating some sort of type hierarchy, just like print or any other sort of media, but type hierarchy is really important. So if we have like just a few sizes, then you just start to understand the importance of those words on the screen so they have more impact and more meaning. And a good example of that is this sort of AOL radio application. Here, there's not a lot of visuals or graphic images, but the text alone, the hierarchy is really important because this is sort of the navigational tool that the user's using to drive their experience. So even though there's a lot of words on the screen, there's really 3 clear choices for me when I'm navigating through here. I choose category, alternative, and then my final stations is 90s alternative. And then just another point about keeping your navigation simple. If I say simple again, I owe you a drink. I'll try not to say that again, but keep it real simple. I mean, distance view in real estate's really tight. Even though our plasma screens are huge and they're getting really big, compared to your desktop monitor, the resolution is really tight. So it's important to split up your task into multiple screens. Again, up, down, left navigation models work well. If you can mimic the hardware in your user interface, then you're making your life a lot easier because it's very similar to, the user kind of recognizes that sort of interaction model. Tabs and multiple scrolling sections, they don't test well. So again, trying to keep things really simple and not having sort of web functionality built into your 10-foot experience. And what we've done here, we've mimicked the remote control, if I had the remote control here, but that black area, we mimicked that in our start menu as well. And just finally, just a point about graphics and icons. Just keep them really big and simple. I mean, the idea of using stuff that is from other distance UI devices is smart. Avoid using those cool pixelated web graphics. They tend to move on the screen. So things that are 1 pixel, and you're really trying to knock those things out, they just don't work well. And icons and widgets generally need to be a little bit larger. What we've done in our own sort of comparison to the desktop application is what you have on the left is what more traditional web desktop, and on the right we've made those a little bit simpler. They're obviously larger, but the banding around all those graphics are a lot thicker. So a 1-stroke pixel on a desktop needs to be almost 3 or 4 pixels in the 10-foot area. And I know this is just general overview information, but Richard's going to come on and talk more about some general guidelines and principles, show some examples, and then Kate will follow. So thank you very much. And then when I'm done, we'll come out, and all 3 of us will do a quick Q&A session. So thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Richard Cardran.
Thank you. Hello. I'm Richard Cardran. I'm with Z Tools. We do media publishing tools, but we've had the wonderful opportunity of working with Media Center, and we've had some good successes. And hopefully today I can share with you some good examples and some bad examples. But I want to start out with just communicating some general excitement that I have. I don't know how many people remember how old you are if you remember the internet boom of a while back, the bust, the bubble. There's a bubble right now. Everybody from AOL to Domino's Pizza has realized that they need a 10-foot solution. They need to be on your television. And things like Media Center make that really, really easy. And I say easy because comparatively easy. In the past, interactive television, ITV, ETV, this involved very rarefied systems with in-band data that only worked on certain kinds of set-top devices. Now we've opened this up to a DHTML environment and moving forward with MCML, the ability to have a lot of people contribute in meaningful ways. And just out of curiosity, how many people are designers in the crowd? And how many people are engineers or developers? About 50-50. How many people do both? Oh, great, exciting. One of the big things I'm going to talk about today is the marriage of the left brain, right brain. Now, Charlie Owen earlier talked about the separation of model and view, and I think that that's a wonderful opportunity to approach these kinds of complex projects in a project management way. But in visualizing it, in trying to put together the concept, it's really important to have form and function marry together. And, you know, any interactive design conference would not be complete without some homage to Apple. I think Apple has defined, at least for me, a very high bar. They know who their brand is. They consistently get it right. But sometimes the marriage of form and function doesn't work particularly well. How many people have ever used this puck mouse, right? What happened? Okay, I mean, were they not talking to each other? Okay, even now, as we move forward, I think they still haven't gotten the idea of buttons. So is this a not invented here problem? I'm not sure, but I do know that it's really important to have things function. So what we're really talking about today is industrial design, not art, but functional design that has to work on a number of levels. So let's talk about some general principles. And I love this slide. I have a Jell-O mold that looks just like this at home. One of the challenges we had at Z-Tools, we built several applications for AOL on Media Center. They wanted a televisual look. They wanted it to look like television, not like a web page. Z-Tools actually engineered a solution with the scaling engine on Media Center to be able to incorporate alpha transparency and PNGs. Obviously, that's really easy to do now moving forward with the new MCML, but this was delivered prior. So we had a challenge by putting our engineers together with our designers and really having a free flow of consciousness between the two. We were able to reach a sum of the parts that was very, very meaningful. So I encourage all of you, it's a challenging world, it's a challenging platform. I mean, you guys have built a web page. You know that there's considerations, there's load time, and there's browser compatibility. When you go to a TV set, those challenges can increase dramatically. So what I would say is put together a process, and you know, everybody has a different kind of process, and that's okay. I think there are different answers out there. But it's really important to follow a process. We're working on one particular application right now that's taken us 8 months just to put together the requirements. We haven't even written one line of code yet. So it's really, really important to get the big picture, talk to everybody, set no limits, go too far, be open-minded, have some justifications. And part of that is when you get to an actual candidate, you know, in a web page, you can scroll down forever. When marketing walks in 2 days before you deliver, and they say, hey, we need this whole new promotional area, well, you can tack it on below the fold, not a problem. Not so in television design. All of this has to be considered up front. It has to be baked in, and the processes have to be refined. But even if you spend months and months and months, and even if you've done all of your homework, and you know the fonts are going to work, and you know the color's going to work, and you know you're on brand, and you know you've got good information design, sometimes the well-vetted plan goes really wrong. And I think as designers, it's good to look at successes as well as failures and understand why. One of the things that happens frequently, not just in design, but in radio and advertising, in a lot of things, I like to call this shoot from the hipsters. These are the kind of people that come in kind of at the last minute with a bunch of requests, edicts, if you will. Well, my TiVo doesn't work that way. Therefore, everything should work like my TiVo. I can't make a button label any shorter. This is where a good project manager comes in, somebody who can manage the extended stakeholders and really get everybody on message, because this is a really crucial point in delivering something that's very, very successful, managing all of those key stakeholders. Okay, now that we've got that, let's really talk about a 10-foot world. And this is how I think most of us come to this. You come from a broadcast design background, you come from an interactive design background, and hopefully you have an information design person as well. This is really informed then through several different key groups or stakeholders behind this. You have brand, you have business requirements, and of course you have platform requirements. All of this has to work 100%. It all has to work together. It all needs to have a synergy about it to really excel and really, really do well. So I'm going to break this down and talk about some of the different challenges here. So from televisual design, the first thing is a brand translation. What is a brand translation? Well, this is probably not the format to talk about that because I could go on for hours about that. A good way to do it is just to see some examples. How many people think this is ABC? Nobody. How many people think this is PBS? How many people think it's Discovery Channel? But the logo, most of you, the logo isn't even on here. They know who they are, and they know exactly how to translate their brand, be it in a 2-foot world like this, or even in a 10-foot world, even in a sub-brand on a partner site, you know immediately who this is. So one of my questions is, how did that happen? I think maybe the Discovery Channel's laid off one too many people. Now, I don't mean to belittle this. I'm sure this was a heroic effort, and I'm sure that they learned a lot from this. But it's really important to understand how to render a brand into a 10-foot world, and it's not as easy as you might think. Apple, now I'm going to say something good about Apple. Apple's got a thing called Front Row. It's nascent. It doesn't really have the depth and some of the other things that we find on other platforms. But from a brand translation point of view, it knows who it is. And Apple users can sit down and do this without even thinking. It's just intuitive to them. So, here's where I think Apple scored really, really well. All right, next, platform appropriateness. And I can't stress this one enough. So there's so many things that you have to consider here that may not be obvious. And I'm just going to pick one at random. I'm going to talk about color. Okay, so you know that there's CYMK and there's RGB. One is additive, one's a subtractive model. By combining these colors, you end up with a complementary set of colors between the two systems. In television, at the low end of the spectrum are the blues and greens. This is why they use blue screen to do effects. It's low power, it's low frequency, it's very stable, it's really, really easy to do things in a blue or green. And you see a lot of applications out there on television in a blue and green format. As you move up the power curve, you have higher and higher frequencies, you have more instability, and it's why this happens on a television set. The first thing to go really, really wrong are the reds. So does it mean you can't use red in your design? TiVo didn't think so. But I would point out, if you see the white writing on here, it's blooming, it's flaring. A better solution to that, I think, was Showtime. They have a red brand, but they put all of their content on a neutral background. Here's a great way of still using red, but doing it in a way that's friendly or platform appropriate. All right, let's see. Next we have form factors. This is tough, and it's getting harder. It's getting a lot harder for designers to really try and operate between all of these different form factors. And indeed, when you're developing for a televisual world, we all look at things in a 4:3 ratio on our monitors, but I think you really have to design everything at this point with a 16:9 form factor. Give it the real estate, give it, be it centered or on the right or however you want to do it, give it the negative space so that it can live comfortably in both a 4:3 and a 16:9. And the world is even more complex than that, especially if you own a Toshiba laptop. and if you want to consider the new tablet formats that are out. This is a challenge. This is a really, really big challenge. And again, this is where I think MCML is offering us some real advantages over standard development. Okay, so now I'm going to sort of harp on this one for a while. Information design, probably the most crucial thing that people, at least inexperienced people designing for a 10-foot world, kind of lose. They miss out on a little bit. And this is because television, as we've all heard, big fonts, but it goes beyond that. So let's look at some examples here. Structuring a good information design means that you're moving between what's exampled here. This is music choice. This is a parallel experience or a 2-foot experience with a lot of information on the screen at once. The corresponding 10-foot experience looks much, much different. Same thing is true at Napster. You have a parallel experience. You also have a serial experience. So it's really important to plan out the paths and the workflows for your users to be able to follow a particular direction, follow a particular path and a workflow so that they're not overwhelmed with a lot of different parallel processes going on. Really critical. And part of that is information design from a labeling and semantics point of view. And then finally, I just want to go through and talk a little bit about navigation. So there's a couple different approaches, and I think a lot of us come to 10-foot design with our only experience being DVD menus. So DVD menus are probably the easiest thing to accomplish in a 10-foot world because there's a very limited data set. All you really do is sort of move between a very small set of data. It's much more challenging as you start to work your way up into large data sets and portals. We get these sort of constructs that become really unwieldy and difficult to use and difficult to follow. So one of the ways to approach this is something called fixed focus, and I think we saw an example of that earlier. The idea here is that the content itself flows through the focus rather than the focus moving up and down on the content. If you look at things like TiVo, it's a very web page metaphor. The highlight bar goes up and down, and then you load a new page. It would be probably the next generation of TiVo, maybe a good suggestion for them, is to take the content and flow it through focus. This is what the creative people and the designers with Media Center have done really, really well. And then even Google is using a fixed focus on some of their 2-foot work. So we're seeing this approach sort of show up in many different places now. And of course, you know, this is where it all falls on its face, platform limitations. We did a very interesting application for Bloomberg, which was on a DCT 2000 set-top box. We had 6K of memory available. Can you imagine? 6K of memory. So the platform really dictates the design approach and the design execution. The good news, again, these systems are getting really, really powerful. You're able to do amazing things on something like a media center. Okay, so let's just quickly look at some examples from the real world. Here was the Napster we saw before. This is a great example of what sort of is informed by, you know, a web design, but sort of rendered down into a serialized workflow process. The next step, if we were to evolve this forward to more of a televisual approach, would be to introduce something that maybe was informed from a motion graphics or a televisual graphic design point of view. And then, of course, Brian earlier said it's even better if you can start to allude to some of the instrumentalities. So maybe your UI can actually reflect some of the hardware that's driving the experience. This becomes really intuitive to users then. They really understand how this works. And if you're working in a fixed focus metaphor, some interface like this could actually handle millions of assets very easily. So it's that kind of thinking that, looking forward. Looking back for a minute, you know, you're all familiar with probably some of your local cable interfaces. Here's sort of I would call a glorified DVD menu approach. TiVo uses the same kind of approach. And I just thought it would be interesting for a moment to sort of overlay TiVo on Media Center and kind of get an idea from just the visual hierarchy, the weight of the type, the sort of negative space, the way that they've built focus. These things are very, very similar. They operate very differently, but they both come from the same point of reference. I think it's really important to use the platform, whatever it is, whatever you're designing for. We literally had a customer come to us with a Flash movie saying, here's what you're going to build for us on Media Center. It was impossible. Media Center didn't do what this Flash movie did, and we spent a very long time re-educating them back to what the platform does. They had never seen a Media Center. So it's really important to use these tools and get a good understanding of what they can do and design for it. So here's just a couple quick shots of some of the AOL work that we did. These are different portals, AOL Pictures. This is the radio app you saw earlier. This was a very interesting project. This is a real strange one because this is meant to be run on a giant plasma screen with, it's a touch screen. So even though it's a 10-foot experience, it was designed to actually walk up 2 feet from it and be able to actually touch the screen with your finger. This is the bastard from hell, but it somehow, you know, we were able to solve those problems. Here's a great example of a complete train wreck. You know, I'm sorry. You know, I'm sure they tried, but you see, as Brian called out earlier, the idea of the rubber band over on the left around some things. Other things are solid buttons. This has lots of navigation. You know, pick one. It's kind of scary. TV Guide, certainly something really easy to use. This is great for grandma. Grandma can use this thing with no instructions whatsoever. Wow. I have Dish, and I have to say Dish is a wonderful service. This is their interactive screen, and it's a great example of, I think, the shoot from the hipsters who wanted to throw it all on there. But they did it well. I have to say it works very well, but it's terribly confusing. This is Moxie. I don't know how many people have seen Moxie. In my opinion, probably the best example of a 10-foot UI ever. Look at all these logos, but they make sense. Look at the fixed focus. You really know what you're doing, and you know what the workflow process is. This is a really, really well thought out UI, highly successful, and I would encourage all of you to go investigate some of the Moxie designs that are out there. What's next? Well, I think our real limiting factor here is platform. I think you know, the power of the platform, how much animation you can put, how much video you can show, and a great way to be informed moving forward, I think, is to look at some games. Because the game people have been doing 10-foot UI for a very long time on very powerful platforms. And it's certainly not to say that we want a Domino's pizza portal to look like an Xbox game. But it's a great way, if you go out and you want to actually do some homework and be informed, looking at game UI, I think, is the closest thing we're going to find to seeing how it's going to be as we move forward. And that's it. So we'll be back out for questions. Next is Kate. And thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kate Wochuk-Bay, and I'm an Associate Creative Director with Schematic in Los Angeles. I'm going to introduce you today to some of the special considerations that we take when we're designing a 10-foot interface. Some of the topics that I'm going to run us through include this idea of new TV, and what do we mean when we're considering this new kind of televisual experience. We're also going to talk a little bit about spatial navigation, creating branded portal spaces, the idea of blending media in new ways that technology couldn't support previously, and then I'll run us through a little bit of our design processes. First, I want to introduce you to this idea of what is television in a new space. People are used to obviously sitting back on their couch and digesting, but what do we need to consider when we're designing an interface for someone to use? Brian and Richard both talked a lot about distance, the 10-foot factor. I'd also like us to consider these other distances, 200, 25, 10, 2, and 1. Whenever you're designing an interface for a 10-foot experience, you don't want to have to start over when you move into a larger public space or a more personal one-on-one experience with your PC. So I always say to design with all mediums in mind, but obviously maximize for the medium at hand. Next is the issue of time. People, when they're doing content finding on their TV, they want a quick, sort of snappy experience. They're really just in a process of finding what they're looking for. So that content needs to be sort of snackable. You need to sequence the information so not everything is presented at once, and it's presentational in its format. We're talking about rich media content here. People have an expectation of the kind of graphics that they're seeing on their TV, so we need to make the most of what broadcast graphics can do. We just talked about content being presentational and sequencing that for the user to be able to digest. We also find that when we're developing these interfaces, often they exist in a sort of physical space, because you have to design to accommodate such a breadth of content, but you want to keep the user focused on their current experience. So we're often setting up a physical space that content lives within, and the user begins to understand how and where experiences exist in that space. We're talking about blended media in a way that we haven't been able to do it before. So we're talking about video game and video content coming together. And obviously, the experience is always going to be user-driven. Now we're going to talk a little bit about spatial navigation. We know that our primary input device is our remote control, and we're really focused on that sweet spot with our north, south, east, west navigation. A pretty basic model, which is a little bit like the TiVo example that Richard just took us through, is more of a screen-to-screen format where your highlight is moving around. Or you can keep your highlight focused and move content through that space. That can obviously happen in two directions. You'll see an example in this demo of a Discovery Network portal that we built, where we kept the user on a single wide axis and kept them moving sort of X and Y, but not as much into Z space. And then you'll see other examples where we move the user across all axes. Obviously, your navigation scheme is key. You're going to be developing an interaction model that's really critical to the user understanding how they're going to be finding content. The scheme needs to educate the user about where content is. It needs to be easy to use and intuitive. It's going to drive that overall experience. And lastly, it's always going to be sort of an extension of the brand. The first work sample we're going to look at is the Sony Surfspace project, which was done quite a while ago at Schematic. I think it's almost 6 years now. But what you'll see is that certain experiences are designated in certain areas of the physical space. So content that's coming from the web is existing off to the right. Promotional-based experiences are off to the left. Home network and favorites are above and below. And you can tell that this content is a little bit older by some of the TV programs that you're seeing in here. But it's all based on sound design principles that can be applied to any 10-foot interface that's being developed now. So we're going to move over into this promotional space off to the left. And that's really a home for a network like Fox to sort of push different pieces of content at you. You'll notice that the information is also being sequenced to the user, and we're really using a lot of sort of flat two-dimensional graphics, but we're animating them in a way that's really engaging for the user. Next, we're going to go into doing some genre-based browsing. Especially with EPGs, where you're having to accommodate up to 1,000 channels, you need to develop a system for the user to find the content that they want easily. We're also really browsing by using video-based content, and all of the text that's on screen is really a secondary experience for the user. They're able to do the quick scan visually. Now, we know that direction is going to have meaning in these physical spaces, and transitions are really key to understanding that space. The next sample we're going to look at is, again, going to have time-based content being linear TV type of programming on the left, and non-time-based content, which is coming from your broadband connection off to the right. This is a project called Sonet that we did in Japan a few years back, and they had the luxury of a really high-end set-top box that could handle these kind of graphics. If you look at this here, we're going to come into the broadband side. We have moving video, we have graphics that are transitioning, we have the sequencing of information to really make that a visually rich experience. We now do this big shift over to our linear content on the left. And you'll notice that all of the design elements are really pretty simple, but you develop this rich space and this elegant movement, and it becomes a really dynamic experience. I'm going to show you now just a few of these screen designs dead on. You'll also notice that there's a different graphical treatment for time-based content versus non-time-based. All the TV content is treated with these sort of graphically rounded rectangles, where all the broadband content is used in a circular form. And when you combine that with the sort of dramatic camera view from one content type to another, you really help the user to understand that just at a glance. Now I'm going to show you a few branded portal spaces that we've developed. The first of which is bringing MTV's Overdrive to the Media Center. And this was a really great challenge for us. The Overdrive team had put together this really polished product that was for the web, and we needed to figure out how that experience can be translated for the 10-foot user. And if you look at these at a glance, they really feel like the same product. So that brand has translated really seamlessly to the 10-foot. We've done a little bit of organizational change. You notice in the web-based application, we have our top-level sort of categories running horizontally, and then all of the content distributed vertically below that. In the Media Center edition, what we did is we moved to a system of vertical regionalization. Since you're using your directional arrow keys to move between content, we took that top-level category and made it our leftmost column in our content finding side of the interface. We also developed this kind of sweet spot highlight area to keep the user focused when they're doing their content finding. So they're moving from the lineup to, and focusing across to a single show, and then getting meta information and actions they can take on that show. And what it does is it really keeps the user from popping around the screen too much and having to always track where they are, because they're doing two things at once. You know, they're digesting their video content and their content finding. The next sample I'm going to show you is that lateral spatial navigation setup that I described. And this was an early project that we did with Discovery Network and Microsoft. And what we're doing is we're laying out sort of a wide brand landscape. We're going to drop in right dead center, which is our time-based orientation to the content. As you move right, you get more focused into particular shows and special things that you can do with a single episode. And as you move back out left, you're going to be sort of zooming up philosophically, and you're going to be getting promotional content for the network and then promotional content for the network family. So you can get stuff for TLC and Animal Planet. Here again, we're using a lot of 2D static graphics, but transition and sequencing of information is helping that to really feel rich. We're down to the sort of most focused level there at the end in the purple screen where we're getting details about a particular show. We're going to head back out here and we're getting promotional content for Discovery and then up to the network family. And what we wanted to do is really design a meaningful content experiences at all those levels. You'll also notice that as you're moving laterally on this interface, you're not going screen to screen to screen, but you're really transitioning and you're getting remnants of what those other experiences are just left and right of where you are. The next piece of work I'm going to show you is the project we did with Queer Eye and Bravo for AFI's Digital Content Lab. And this was a media center and mobile project. I'm going to show you mostly the media center stuff. What we were doing is we were developing a branded portal for Queer Eye on Media Center. It was never designed to sort of replace the traditional website where you can get really more sort of content density there. It was really sort of to be a home for them in the 10-foot experience. It was also a way to allow the users to watch the content in an enhanced format. So here we're going in, we're previewing an episode, and we're going to go down and tell our DVR to record it. Now we're going to move up into some of the more evergreen content about the characters, the Fab Five. And again, it's just a quick little orientation to who these people are. And then later we'll go down and we'll go into an episode guide. Now I want to show you some of what we designed for the enhanced content experience. And at this point, the users come back into the portal, the show is on, and they have elected to watch it in an enhanced format. That offers a lot of interesting opportunities, the first of which is this idea of marking. Here there's a special offer that's being provided by American Express. We can just mark that and have it be something that we come back to later. It allows the user a way to sort of gather some of the content that they find interesting, but really keep them in the experience. Here we're using the same sort of enhanced format, but what we're doing is we're offering the users multiple camera views on a particular scene. You'll see another application of this in the CSI work that we've done. Here they're running really quickly through the scene of what they've done in this room, and we're just allowing the user to have some alternate camera views off to the left. And the last enhanced experience I'm going to show you is marking products. The Queer Eye show is really perfectly positioned for this, but there's all kinds of applications that you could make. Here they're running through a number of products that they've installed in this home. We're going to get more details on one. That's something that's of interest to us. We're going to mark it as something we're going to go back and explore later. Now let's go back into the portal after the show. Let's say we've returned back at a later time. And we're going to look at some of the content that we've marked. We're going to pass through the episode guide and go down into our marked content. We're presented with the top items that we just marked from our most recent episode. We're going to go pass through these commercials. We're going to go into this recipe that we marked while we were watching. You can get your ingredients list, how do you make this, instructions, tips on buying. It can really be applied to any kind of content. We also then marked a piece of furniture that we were interested in. This is a piece from West Elm. We want to find out how we can get that. Do they have a store in my area? What are the details? What are the dimensions? Will it work for me? Just a way for the user to be able to sort of flag some of that stuff that's interesting for them and then be able to return back to it later. Here are just a few quick frames from what the mobile experience was. We talked about distance planning. You can see that this frame on the left here really feels like the front end of that Queer Eye portal on Media Center. You're having the same experience of previewing, reminding, and recording. Here are those marked items. That's going to be handy when you're out shopping. The next project I'm going to show you is called Zen. It's the Xbox Entertainment Network. And it was a prototype that we did a few years back. And it's really a lesson in whenever you have a creative challenge, to aim far and tailor back rather than to stay constricted in what your current restraints are and try and sort of push outside of that. We're in a transitory period where the things that restrict us now aren't going to be restricting us 6, 9, 12 months from now. So what we were doing is we were doing an exploration and sort of trying to put a marker out there in the future about what something could be. So you have this big brand open, which is an expectation that people have for TV. We've done this sort of organization of content and experiences. So we're going in here, we're looking at CBS shows. That rotating box off to the right is always a promotional space. And as we move back, the plus sign off to the left is really giving you more details and more opportunities for the single thing that you were focused on. Here we have an episode guide, cast, things like that. Here you can go into a collection of genre-oriented content, all reality. Again, you have your promotional experiences to the left, your more detailed experience, promotional experiences off to the right, detailed information off to the left. And that's an experience that'll be consistent for the user. Now I'm going to take you in and show you some samples that we did for GameTap. I want to show you the first sort of early prototype that we did in trying to get Turner on board. You know, you do a lot of tests in the beginning of what is your interaction model going to be. And Turner was really willing to take a risk and do something that was a lot less traditional. You know, their gaming audience was really sort of a perfect target to do some of this out-of-the-box thinking on. So we did this initial study, and then I'll take you in and I'll show you what the final product ended up being. GameTap is also a great lesson in doing distance planning, where this was designed to use a mouse, but it wouldn't be that hard to translate it into a 10-foot experience using a remote control because of the way the content is organized. Now I'm going to show you the opening sequence for the final resolution of GameTap. And whenever you're designing these experiences and these interfaces, that first opening sequence is so important because it obviously is the first introduction of the brand to the user. But it's important to sort of educate the user about how the content is organized and also speak to the breadth of content that the interface is supporting. So you'll see the way that GameTap opens, it introduces the brand and then does this really elegant sequence that sort of teaches the user this structure of these concentric rings cascading down. You can imagine that if it just opened and it was already in the state that it's in now, it wouldn't be as intuitive to understand, okay, I'm going to go up to change into a different genre of game. And I'll show you one more move here in the GameTap interface. And this just shows sort of how dramatic a single camera move can be to sort of orient the user about what they're doing and where. Dale Herigstad, who's our executive creative director, is working for with the Center for Media Design at Ball State University, and they've developed this amazing technology to do eye tracking on interfaces. And it's sort of an interface designer's dream to sort of get this directed data of what somebody's paying attention to while they're using the interface. That data is then spit out as sort of data models. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of blended media and bringing together media experiences that weren't necessarily happening together before. The first sample of work I'm going to show you is the CSI Interactive. It's a similar format to what we saw for some of the enhanced content for Queer Eye. Here we're displaying this additional content around a sense of place for the user. So they're describing this particular crime scene. We're squeezing back the video and then taking the user through an actual floor plan of the crime scene. And you know, these kind of graphics and design scenarios are not very difficult to build. We did this with a pretty lean team at Schematic. Next is back to this idea of the multi-camera view, where before in Queer Eye we were seeing it as sort of giving us a better idea of the physical space that they were running through so quickly. Here, when the dialogue is sort of, they're so focused in that experience, it can take you out and give you a different view of the scene. And the last work sample I'm going to take you through is the work we did with Battlestar Galactica. This was also an AFI Digital Content Lab project, and it was designed to use the game box as a set-top box for blended media. Again, we have this orientation of what kinds of experiences are happening where. We have our multi-camera experiences above, some bio-recall sort of character information off to the right, sense of place to the left, and we're going to drop down to get into gameplay. So here we're watching full screen video a trigger is going to come up. This is, a dialogue between a few characters. A trigger is going to come up that you can get more information, a little bit of backstory on who those characters are and get to know them, which is really great for new viewers to a series. Again, your audio is staying focused on your linear broadcast on the left, so you're able to digest both sets of information. And again, you'll notice the content is being sequenced off to the right there. Here we're looking at an enhanced advertisement in this space. And you could take a 30-second spot and have it sort of slapped in there. But just by having some of the elements from that spot break out of the space really makes them feel like they're more appropriate for this environment that's been set up. Just like we did on Queer Eye, you should be able to mark this ad as an experience that you want to go have later. And it really opens up advertisers to the idea of having new content experiences. The last sample I'm going to show you from Battlestar Galactica is this idea of blending the game and the TV program. So while we're watching the broadcast here, they have a ship that they're about to drop into a battle scene. And what we're going to do as a user is we're going to squeeze back. Our video is going to sort of remain reduced in our frame of view, but we're going to actually drop in and join in as gameplay. So you're still getting your program. The Galactica ship is sort of tagged in the space, but you're now participating in that. One last thing from Battlestar here is this idea of the sense of place. So they've been in this battle scene, the ship's been hit, you don't know what they're talking about as a user. You should be able to squeeze back and see a model of that ship and zoom in and get more information about what they're talking about. I'm just going to go quickly through some of our design processes. The greatest challenge that we face when doing these 10-foot interfaces is really that it's a new kind of information architecture. And it's a real learning curve when you're bringing together people that have a broadcast design background or a traditional web background, or they're sort of halfway in the middle in information design. Designing these experiences is a really different kind of architectural process than designing for the 2-foot experience. Stuff that we find helpful for us is that you're always going to be designing graphical objects in a space. And we often end up doing a lot of top view diagramming early on so you can understand the relationship of those different content experiences within that space. You can also start to do some explorations of, is the content itself actually moving and reacting to the user's decisions, or is the camera moving within that space? We've talked a lot about defining meaning to directions. Describing animation. Motion is always key to these experiences. People have the expectation that everything's going to move, everything's going to transition, and all of that has to be sort of geared towards the user understanding how content is organized and where they can find it. Early on, we always move into animating wireframes, even if they're in the crudest form, just so we can start to get a little bit of that understanding. It's really the next step after those top view diagrams for the Z-space planning. And again, doing a little bit of distance planning. So this is the sort of task at hand right now. But let's make some smart decisions so we're not starting over when we're applying this experience to a different distance. A few design details is that you're always going to be layering graphical design elements. You're going to be sequencing the display of particular items. You're going to be scalable for whatever application you're in. You're planning for different distances of consumption. And you're really going to be dealing with a different sort of hybrid design team. And again, this is bringing design and technology together, is bringing web designers that are rooted in information design together with broadcast TV designers, so you can get that sort of happy medium. That's it.
Thanks, Kate.
Sure.
So we're going to do a quick QA. I think actually we have plenty of time. We have 15 minutes. Yeah. So that was fantastic work. And I just want to make a quick point. All the work you're seeing today, I mean, you could build that type of application and those sort of experiences and Windows Media Center for Vista. So I'm looking forward to seeing sort of the next gen of a lot of these applications. So we have time for Q&A. I can't really see a thing, so I'm going to just step back a little bit. There we go. Somebody here.
Yeah, I'm a long-time TiVo user and also sort of a long-time Media Center user. My wife and I sort of fell in love with our TiVo and we couldn't let it go. So I spent about a year where I had both machines up and running. And generally I found that they mapped really well. There was nothing really wrong with Media Center. I'm a big Media Center fan. But there were two aspects of design that I had questions about that hopefully you can answer. And one thing that really perplexed me was the back button. As a TiVo user, I'm navigating up and down. So when I'm going left and right, left is back, right is forward. So I see you're doing more with the horizontal in Vista, but was that a conscious design choice to have this, it's not a cardinal direction, it's just back?
Well, yeah, because we found actually in the web world, the back button is really popular sort of command because people just want to get back to where they recently were. So as they're drilling in, rather than using the left and right button, which might be used in that particular entry point. So for instance, if I pick my music and videos and I go into my music area, I'm using that left button to navigate through my content. But if I want to jump up a level, the back button's kind of our key way of doing that. And then what a lot of times people will do too is use the green button as sort of like get me home really quickly. So it was a conscious decision to do that.
Okay. And then my second question, the other thing that really perplexes me is, say I want to search for a program by title. So you got this great up, down, left, right metaphor, which works wonderfully. And then you're typing in a title, and the way TiVo does it, you sort of have a virtual, not a keyboard really, but you're using up, down, left, right to enter a name. Whereas in Media Center, then I'm all of a sudden kicked into this world where I use the numeric pad. And it's in the phone sense of you got to press it 3 times to get the right letter.
Triple tap.
And I was just really confused by that because, I mean, how often do people use the number buttons? And why was the up, down, left, right abandoned in that scenario? And is that also true of the Vista version?
It is true of the Vista version. Triple tap doesn't test well. And we find that people do still use the keyboard for those situations. But I don't know why we're not comparing that to sort of TiVo. I just don't know why we're not doing that.
One option is build your own. In the AOL applications, you have to log in. We built an on-screen keyboard that works really, really well with a left-right, up-down paradigm. So if you don't like, the great thing about Media Center is if you don't like it, you can build it your way.
Sure. No, in general, I love Media Center, but I was just curious because, you're up, down, left, right, it's working great, and all of a sudden, boom, I'm back in the telephone world. It's like, what happened?
Right.
Text entry for a 10-foot interface designer is our worst nightmare. It's one of the hardest things about it is really, I mean, a lot of it is that how many users really do want to spend a lot of time sort of entering textual information into a 10-foot experience. Mm-hmm. I know when I'm using my TiVo at home, I'm doing that sort of with as few letters as possible. And then I'm jumping right over to sort of browsing what they're delivering me. So it's a tough challenge.
Okay, thank you.
I have a 2-part question. Mm-hmm. The first part is to the person who's evangelizing this platform. And I'm wondering if you really think that people are going to build interfaces like that. I mean, I'm looking at multi-million-dollar projects, right? And that's great for Hollywood. But the last I heard, Bill Gates' vision is to bring the PC onto the desktop and make it accessible. And what I'm seeing is Hollywood. And so to me, that's not really in the spirit of rolling your own and writing software, right? So the second part of the question, because of course there's no answer to that, right? So the second part of the question is to the other 2 participants. How come you think there haven't been more roll your own homebrew kind of interfaces? There's something called YouTube. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Sure, of course.
How about Blair Witch Project, right? Yeah. I mean, that's what's happening today in the world, not Battlestar Galactica or really expensive production.
Well, I have a great answer for that. ZTools builds tools, and we've built a tool that does that. We have an output we call MCEZ, which is an XML template, and anybody can use it. It's skinnable, very easy to do.
How much does it cost?
Well, you'll have to talk to my business development executive over
How about
there.
open source?
Someday. We're getting there.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
Because, again, I'm not going to buy the tool, right? It's just, I don't have the budget. Ain't going to happen. So, again, I would recommend to the guys evangelizing the platform, get a lot of those free tools.
Right.
And don't emphasize Hollywood. We know that Hollywood can spend millions of dollars, but we need to see like what would be the YouTube version of this stuff, rather than the really expensive throw money at it and keep a lot of multiple designers employed kind of stuff.
So you're right. I probably shouldn't answer that, but we are working on some projects that explore the long tail content, and that's probably the next talk I'll give. But
yeah, because my gut tells me is until you have that, you don't have a platform.
So, and we recognize that.
So. All right, great.
I also think that some of what we're trying to do in this discussion is lay out some design principles that can be adopted by anyone for any kind of application. Really.
Okay. Great.
Hi, I've got a two-part question with three subparts and two rhetorical questions.
Great.
No, actually, it's pretty... So, I'm not part of the design part of the world. We're part of the utilities part of the world, and media centers are computers, and computers need utilities, and those utilities sometimes have to communicate to the user. So what happens when a virus alert needs to come up, or your backup has failed and you're watching your show? Where is your advice for how to communicate non-exciting information, but maybe pertinent or timely information to the user?
It's all very important. I mean, there's still going to be, I'm pushing for full fidelity experience, but there's still going to be applications out there that are just really sort of, very simple to use and more utilitarian, as well as getting that kind of user feedback from dialog boxes and things like that.
There's also an expectation of what is television. And I think that what we've found through our partners and our customers is that users are really looking for a lean-back experience through their media center experience and a lean-forward experience with their PC. So oftentimes, business rules come into play. Is it really a good idea to have a lot of transactional screens? Is it a good user experience to enter credit card numbers with your remote or virus scan your computer? And the answer is probably no. There's probably a subset of user experience which is really, really valuable on your TV, from your easy chair, with your remote, and another related experience that you can have directly with that PC using a conventional 2-foot experience.
So that brings up two questions. Sorry, I'm getting into my subparts now. One is, I'm actually more interested in how you manage the context changes. I'm watching a show. I've gone in, I've turned on my show, it's recorded or live or whatever, and a utility running on that PC decides it needs to communicate to the user. Who takes control? How does that control handle? Do I pause? Does the TV automatically get paused and then the message pops up? I can tell you our users wouldn't like that. Right. So how do you handle that? What is programmatically what is going on inside Vista to manage that sort of context changes?
That's a good question. It's probably not a really pertinent question for a design panel like this. Maybe what I would suggest...
My UI designers want to know. That's
what I'd suggest you do is Charlie Owen has a blog that is a really wonderful, deep, rich resource that you can ask questions to, and he will absolutely get you the answers you're looking for. And he's a much better authority at this than any of us would be.
So the other subpart of the question then is in the context of sitting in your living room watching Media Center, are you envisioning people will have a separate console or separate way to sit down and do administrative things on their PC?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the message this morning, too, is we believe that the home computer might not actually be in the living room. Maybe it's actually in the office, and the Xbox 360 is that extension into the living room where the television is. Does that answer your question?
So, okay, that concept, I think, needs to be explored and defined a little bit better, because right now I think people are thinking PC in the living room, driving this.
Well, here's
understanding the configurations
sure.
and where the control exists is going to be something that needs to be very clearly defined.
Here's a great example to answer that question. Companies like Sony and LG and Philips are building digital media adapters directly into their plasma screens. So you literally plug your DSL cable into your TV set, and your media center is in your home office. So while you're typing letters and doing email, somebody else on the plasma screen is watching 10-foot content. That's a great example of how a networked e-home environment allows different people to have different experiences with a shared media resource. So there isn't one answer, it's many answers, and it's a connected answer.
Hi, I'd like to go back to text entry for a second. I don't know if you guys have seen a video game that was called Beyond Good and Evil. They had this wonderful text entry system where you used the thumbstick to go through some kind of spiral with the alphabet on it. And this was a very, very efficient way to enter text. And when you look at the front row remote, or this thing, it's very similar. You rotate to get to what you're looking for. And it's a very fast way to enter text using only a very simple control. So what do you guys think about the front row remote, and how do you compare that to the media center remote, which has a ton of buttons? So did you guys consider adding something like that to the media center experience? Or?
We have, yes we have, but I mean, I think that's sort of our next generation to come. There's a lot of different technologies we're exploring there, and I think for now, like Richard was saying, you could build that type of mechanism into your own experience using our markup language. But from a total shell and hardware standpoint, we're not there yet. So.
We saw a lot of good examples over the last 5 years, it seems, that you've been building these kind of new user experiences that look very 3D, zoom in and out. Which of them were actually successful in the sense of driving ROI, engaging new viewers, and which do you think will be successful in the future? Why haven't they taken off yet, if we've been working on them for 5+ years?
Well,
I'm curious.
Part of the difficulty is that some of the processor speeds haven't been able to support all of that visionary work. Now, with the sort of next generation of the Media Center and Vista, I think that we're going to be able to push a lot closer to that. In an agency environment, you're always doing work that you're trying to really spec out. Where is this company or this brand going to be in the future? And that's always important work to sort of try and put a marker out there that you can push towards. We've done a lot of interfaces that have been really successful. The I/O Cablevision system has been a really great product for them as a company. It's won a lot of awards, and it's got a lot of really great user feedback. I don't have any samples of that in this deck here. It's all available for viewing on the Schematic Company website.
Well, I think, just to elaborate a bit, what you've seen tonight for the first time on the new Vista edition with MCML is actually plausible because the system is powerful, it can do a lot, it's got alpha transparency, it's got animation. There's a really engaging new high bar of user experience that's now finally possible. So that's number one. If it looks like some of the examples I showed with cable interfaces, it's not that engaging. People can't really understand it. It doesn't look like TV, it looks like a web page. I think what you're going to see really, really soon is that all the media companies get this in a big way. AOL Time Warner has announced Into TV publicly. It's literally going to have millions of assets, full screen, full motion, complete episodic delivery of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of television shows and music videos and homework help. When you start seeing this volume of content, it really means that several things came together. The broadband market, broadband penetration is finally there. The platforms like Media Center are finally mature and usable. And now with Vista, I mean, literally every computer is going to have this capability. People have purchased devices. They've purchased a TiVo, they've purchased an Xbox, not really because they knew there was going to be all this content. They bought it because it was a TiVo or because it was an Xbox, or they bought a new PC. But when they discover how much content is really there, it's really an amazing new world. We're seeing broadcast shrinking dramatically and consolidating. Viacom just spun off CBS this year because they don't believe broadcast has a future. Ad models are here. Advertisers are excited about this. The budgets are here, the devices are here, and the user population is here. So I think your question is good. It's taken 5 years to get here, but this truly is what we've said year after year. This is the year where it all gets real.
Thank you.
We have 40 seconds. Let's take another one.
All right. I just have a really quick question for you guys, or maybe you can go into more detail later. It's about your design process. I work for a firm that spends a lot of time talking about design processes and artifacts, and you mentioned actually talking about animating your wireframes at a pretty early stage. I'd love to just get a top-level overview of how you guys get just that one from concept to really communicating that concept to either internal or externally. What do you guys do? How do you go about it?
Yeah, and I can give you some more feedback sort of one-on-one after this session about that. But we do find that that is a really sort of critical part as we're sort of early stage as we're trying to figure out what our interaction model is. And usually it's, us sort of going straight from a whiteboarding session where everybody's trying to sort of find something to hook into to figure out what this new system is and what this new content experience is, moving straight from that whiteboard session, interpolating sort of what some of those content experiences are that were described, and translating that into a little bit of a physical space. And it's usually in a really sort of crude way with no attention to detail about how much meta information is going to be displayed or how many different actions you can take on a particular kind of item or how many genres we're going to talk about. But it's really sort of one level of an experience to another, and it's going straight, in our shop, it's usually going straight from content blocked out in Illustrator right into After Effects to getting some sort of quick motion tests going.
That's a great discussion to have, though.
Yeah.
Offline, for sure. Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks, Richard and Kate. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're done. Thanks.
Thanks.